This story begins with a not very joyous event, namely a funeral. A girl with blonde hair walked among the guests with her head down, straight toward the tombstone, and the people who were also present at the funeral began to talk. Many said that this was her fourth husband, and many even speculated that she was the one who was killing them all. One of the girls asked her not to be so loud about it because they might hear her, but she waved her off and said that she didn't have to worry, because everyone called her that anyway. It was indeed true. The girl with blonde hair was called by everyone a witch who kills her husbands one by one. Shortly after the funeral ceremony, she returned to the manor, where she was immediately met by a maid. She turned to Mrs. Elisa and asked if she was all right. The girl smiled back at her and told her she was fine, and thanked the maid Erica for her support, as she really appreciated it. Alicia then turned around and said that she was perfectly fine now, so she would go back to work, and wanted to be alone for now. Erica in turn replied that she would carefully make sure that no one disturbed her during that time. In fact, this was really Alice's fourth marriage, and the death of her fourth husband in a row. Even though the causes of their deaths are different, there is still something that unites them, and that is that they all died exactly 1 year after marrying her. At this rate, Alicia is starting to think she's the problem, and yet she has never even had the wedding she wanted. The girl is a princess and the last member of the royal family that fell 20 years ago. Her mother and brother took advantage of her position as members of the royal family and brought to her one by one various candidates for husbands. However, now that the monarchy had fallen and the Revolutionary Army had established the Republic of Glory, their past had only become a stigma on their lives. And until that day, all ex-husbands had humiliated her and used even violence against poor Alice. However, only the last husband, Basilisk, never raised his hand, though he was indifferent to the girl. She thought she could finally start her normal married life, but he died like all the others. But now, as Elise was going to her office, she did not feel well. It was hard to breathe, and she even cried with grief. The girl now really wanted to cuddle against someone's chest, and she even wondered where her mother had gone, because she would have liked to cuddle with her and just sit in silence. In fact, every time she gets married, that outright pray that this wedding will be her last. At this moment, Alicia was walking past the open room and heard her mom and brother talking. Mother cried out and said that she hadn't thought he would die so quickly, for he didn't look weak. But anyway, it was even a good case. But the young guy who was talking to her asked her to be careful about it. After all, they would be in trouble if anyone overheard the conversation. But Mother didn't understand why it had to be careful, since no one was even around. So she asked if a new husband had already been found for Alicia. The girl who stood under the door could not understand what they were arguing about. Brother said the most important thing now was to get rid of the hype surrounding Basilisk's death. Then he asked his mother if she had sorted out everything that might serve as evidence. If they were caught poisoning him, it would be the end of them. But the woman, smiling, told her son to relax, for she had gotten rid of the bottle of poison, as well as the maid she had bribed to do it. Therefore, there was no reason to worry. After all, this wasn't the first time they had done this, so there was definitely no evidence left behind. When Alicia heard this, she was shocked. She couldn't believe that the two of them had actually poisoned Basilisk. Mother told him to find a new husband for her as soon as possible, for lately their plans have not been carried out as they think. So the only source of funding for them now is the inheritance that was left by her husband. But at that moment the girl could not stand it and opened the door. When her brother saw her, he turned to her in surprise and asked her how long she had been standing there. The guy laughed nervously and said that whatever she was hearing right now was completely misunderstood. In fact, those frightened faces of her mother and brother made Alicia think that she had really misheard. In the end, however, it all really turned out to be true. The two of them are murderers. The girl couldn't stand it and started screaming, calling them murderers and cruel people. Her mother ran closer to her and said that it was all wrong. She had misunderstood. But the girl waved her hands away and asked her not to touch her, for she was disgusted to even look at her. Then the brother stood up for the mother and told her not to talk to her own mother like that and to act like a complete idiot now. At that moment, Alicia turned her attention to the appearance of her brother and mother. She thought about the fact that even though it was a funeral, he had degenerated as if for a wedding, and she still couldn't believe that it was all detailed and done just for one thing. The girl looked at them and asked, "Was it really all just for money?" "They killed her husband, lived off his inheritance, and made her a witch who supposedly kills all her husbands." Her mother said nothing, and her brother looked away from her. Then the girl clenched her fist and said that she wanted to be frank. Alicia stepped closer to him, and her brother said that all people die someday anyway, and her husbands only hastened their deaths a little by marrying her. He also said that they had already been given the inheritance, so he didn't understand what the problem was and why she was so worried. He smiled and asked his sister, "Was she ever unhappy about it? After all, you can't take him to the other world with you anyway, and they're making good use of the legacy." Alicia, with tears in her eyes, asked what he was even talking about. She couldn't understand if he was really serious about marrying off his little sister and then just killing her husband in cold blood like that. She said that if he needed the money so badly, why didn't he just marry someone himself? The man got angry and squeezed her hand harder, saying it was impossible. He also said he would bring the monarchy back, and that was all it was for. Then he inquired, "Is he right in thinking that she will not allow herself to record his life this day?" The girl, when she heard all this, was very surprised. She didn't understand how he was going to bring back the monarchy if the republic was already rooted in the people. And on top of that, the movement for the revival of the monarchy was gradually losing momentum. Alicia couldn't believe that her brother had sacrificed her for his empty ambitions, which most likely wouldn't even be fulfilled. All he wants is to be some kind of king of indifferent flaws, and because of that, he subjected his sister to such horrible treatment. After a brief silence, the brother asked, "Does she really think it was bad for her dead husbands?" But smiled and said that all they did was abuse her over little things and disrespect her just even as a woman. They got rid of people like that, so she should rather be grateful to them than angry. When the girl heard this, she froze in place. She asked her brother in a trembling voice, "Did they really know about all this?" Alicia couldn't believe that they knew about her married woman she was so eager to hide from everyone. Her brother asked in a cold voice how much pain she thought they were in, when her face and body were swollen because of the Donison who had beaten her almost to a pulp, or when Nick left her on their wedding night to meet his sweetheart and spend that time with her. Alicia interrupted him and summarized by saying that they did know everything. However, she asked, even though they knew this information, did they continue to pretend as if they didn't see or notice it all? Her mom was silent for a while. Then she smiled and said it was too late, so there was no need to stir up the hornet's nest right now. Then the girl couldn't stand it. She started screaming and asked, "Are they now really suggesting to her to just forget about it all? They're the ones who made her the most miserable in this life. They killed innocent people for their legacy and sold her for nothing for the 4th time." When Mom heard this, she got angry and asked, "Can she really say such things?" She told Alicia not to pretend that she was the only good girl here and asked, "Didn't she notice anything about her husband's dying for the 4th time, and she didn't suspect anything by it?" Alicia, still screaming, said that they had both cleverly tricked her and circled her, since she should have noticed it in the first place, much less suspect anything. But my brother, along with my mom, smiled and asked her to stop already, because she was now making them the worst people in the world. Then the man said that she had been through so much during that time. So didn't she think it would be better to stop at their place and take a little break, for she would rather rest in the fresh air now than sit in 4 walls. Alicia couldn't believe that they were actually trying to calm her down now and keep her locked up in their manor. She was about to say something to that, but she was interrupted. The girl started crying hard. Then the mother embraced her, and they both sat on the floor. The woman said that she must have gotten a huge shock, since she and her husband had been side by side for a year, and now she could rely on them. At last the brother said that he hoped she would have a good rest at their house. She returned to her bedroom, and all night long she was strangled with shock and despair at being betrayed by her own family, who should love and support her in everything. She realized that next time they would repeat the same pattern again, and she would have to think of something to prevent it. Alicia also thought that maybe they would even do it much faster this time, since she had already learned their tricks. But she would have to think of something, because she didn't want innocent people to keep dying. The girl knew and understood perfectly well that sinners must surely be punished, and it did not matter who they were to her. The next morning, when Erica entered Madame's room, she wondered where she had gone so suddenly, for the Lord's funeral was not yet over. Alicia was dressed very nicely and luxuriously. She told the maid that she had somewhere to go, and added that she would leave all the errands and cleaning to her. In fact, her mom and brother weren't at the mansion at the moment, so this was a good chance for her to go out without them following her. The girl also told Erica that when she had already gotten to the right place, she would let her know. But the maid said she wanted to go with her too, and offered to leave the mansion to Chris. But Alicia said no, for she was the only person the girl could rely on at this moment. She took her hand in hers and smiled. Erica was surprised by such a show of love from her mistress, but she also said that she was like a sister to her, because she had been by her side since she was a little girl, so she relied on her support and help. Soon afterwards, the mistress went into town on her own business after all. As soon as she came out from behind the alley, she immediately found a place where wagons stopped that would take her somewhere. Alicia approached one man and, begging his pardon, asked if he could take her to the Kaubara. But when the wagoner heard this, he asked in surprise, "Am I really to dust this locality where the heretic dwells?" He apologized, but said he absolutely did not want to go to such a horrible place. At that moment, the girl handed him a bag of money and said she would pay him 10 times as much. The man immediately took that money and raised his head proudly, saying that since that was the case, it was a different conversation. He turned to the girl before getting into the wagon, smiling and asking what it was that she needed in such a dangerous place. Alicia said with a cold and thoughtful voice that she needed to correct her mistakes there. She wants to do it for the sake of getting her past normal life back, so she definitely needs to go there. Kaubara were classified as enemies a decade ago and were brutally persecuted, leaving many of them hiding in the shadows and many dead. Their temples were almost entirely burned down, and the surviving site is just where the girl had come. As a child, her brother often involved her in religious practices, sometimes even inviting her to the house of the faithful. He also made her pray with him, even though she didn't even understand anything. He always taught her how to do the right thing, even though Alicia was too young to understand anything. Even though she was terrified of such a brother, she still pretended to pray out of desperation. Then she heard a piercing scream beside her. It was her brother desperately turning to the Lord and asking that he return their status and property that had been seized by the Revolutionary Army. He also asked that they be lent their mighty power to overpower those who had killed his father and grandparents. A great many years have passed since then, and the girl has grown up, but she never even thought that one day she would come to this place. Soon she pulled herself together and went to the door, knocking on it. A man dressed entirely in a black cloak opened the door. When he saw the girl, he said nothing, but studied her appearance with his gaze for a while. The man then turned to Alicia and said that the Spirit of God had been cast down and asked if she would follow him. The girl knew the secret words to be spoken, so she said that she was glad and asked to be let in to meet the great God. She really hoped that her memory was correct, and that those words to be spoken at the entrance were correct. The man believed her and led her inside. Then they started down some stairs. Soon she found herself in some kind of cave. The attendant left her, leaving her next to some frightening woman who was sitting there. The stranger greeted the young lady and inquired what wish she had come for. Alicia greeted her and told her her name. But the sorceress interrupted her and said that even if she heard her name, she would immediately forget it. So she asked her to say only what she needed to say. In fact, the reason why this man was branded as a heretic also had to do with why the brother was possessed by him. That was why the girl said she wanted to turn back the clock. It is actually a ban that is against time, only in Kaubar. The mystery that spread the rumor caused people to be both fearful and in awe of it. The enchantress, upon hearing these words, smiled evilly and said that in that case, she had come to the right place. Alicia was worried and couldn't believe that those rumors and what her brother had said were really true. In fact, when they were children, he had stopped her once and told her that he would soon be able to take it all back. The guy said he'd go back in time and make things go back to the way they were, so they wouldn't need anything else. However, the girl still does not know what the reason for all this was. After all, The brother never managed to turn back time, and after the shock could not withstand it and left Kovbara. Even though Alicia thought it was impossible at the time, she still can't believe she's really come to this place. Does that mean how much of a dead end she's been driven to, and how much of a disadvantage she's been at? However, if it was really all nonsense, she would not be able to explain why the heretic was still being pursued. The girl realized that she was running out of time, so she told the sorceress that she would pay her enough. Alicia didn't fully know if it was all true or false, but either way, she didn't want to let those yours ruin her whole life and keep her locked up for the rest of her days. At this moment, the enchantress suddenly smiled and said in a hoarse voice that she didn't really need money at all, because she couldn't say that going back in time would turn out to be a success. The girl was surprised and asked what she meant by that. Then the sorceress said that many people had come to this place to go against logic and the law of time, but none had ever succeeded. And if there was such a convenient and easy way, she wondered if the girl really thought she would be in such an environment right now. When the girl heard this, she began to scream, saying that in such a case she was no different from an ordinary fraudster. But the sorceress asked her to calm down, for she had said nothing and that it was impossible. First, she must give her her feelings and trust, and the most precious thing, her memory. The enchantress also said that if she matched all her qualities, she might be able to do it. When Alicia heard this, she thought about it and began to recall some dear memories. Then she said that she understood and would do as she asked, but she didn't know for sure whether something like this would fit or not. In fact, in hindsight, the girl's life was simply horrible. Every minute of it was a life in which she had to hold her breath, just because the blood of the royal family flowed in her, and yet she had to defend her mother's ideals, as well as her brother's vain nature. Alicia was like a puppet that everyone tried to control. As she grew up, the girl had to participate in various activities that she absolutely hated. Before she knew it, she was married for the first time. It happened so quickly and unexpectedly that she didn't even have time to enjoy the process. At that moment, the sorceress handed her some small vial of green liquid and told her that the fulfillment of their bargain was beginning. She said that when the girl got her thoughts together, she should drink it, and also be sure to drink it only in a place that was special to her. Alicia was very surprised to hear this. She said that she didn't have such a special place. The sorceress asked that she think hard. After all, if it was the wrong place, the effect would certainly not manifest itself in any way, and she would miss her chance. And besides, if she lets the memories go, and if she didn't come back in time, it would all be for nothing. The sorceress finally told the lost traveler to find what he was looking for. Shortly afterward, the girl traveled to the village. She was a little tired, but eventually she came to a place that was special to her. But she wasn't sure if it was the right place for the ritual. She came inside the forest that is near the kingdom. There was a path, and if you followed it straight ahead, you could find the cabin that the hunters used. After a while, Alicia finally arrived at the place. When she looked around, she saw how abandoned it was, and realized that it had been a long time since she'd been there. Every time her mother and brother yelled at her, she would run away to this very house and cry until it was dark. It was easier for her. And then after a while, some stranger came to see her. He calmed her down and told her not to cry. Soon he got so used to the girl coming to the house, he began to ask who had hurt her this time. The girl didn't know until now who it was, but he was with a very kind soul and took pity on her. Now she would probably even want to know who the stranger was. However, Alicia couldn't even remember his face. But this was really the first time she'd ever been treated with kindness without asking for anything in return. The girl walked inside, and everyone on the bed looked at the small bottle the sorceress had given her, and she didn't know if she could definitely get her life back with this. But then she began to worry about what would happen then if she failed. But she quickly pushed those thoughts away, thinking that there was no turning back. And even if she failed, she had nothing left to lose. Alicia, not thinking long, poured into her body the contents of this small bottle. But then suddenly she felt some strange taste, and dropped this bottle, and it shattered on the floor. She didn't understand what this feeling was. She couldn't see anything in front of her. Her eyes were dark, even though they were open. She felt worse and worse by the minute, so she lay down on the bed. She closed her eyes and thought that she would probably die right there in the cabin, all alone. But at that moment someone came into her hut, and when he saw the girl lying there, he shouted at her not to do it. But seeing that the girl did not react in any way, he approached and taking her in his arms, asked her to open vividly eyes. Alicia, through her sleep, heard someone's voice. She opened her eyes a little but could see nothing. She did not know who it was, for the voice was unfamiliar to her. He began to shout, saying that she had come after all, as she had promised. He said that she had said she would come back to this place, but he didn't believe her. The girl, hearing these words, did not understand what he was talking about, and when she had even managed to make such a promise. Alicia reached her hand toward him and thought about whether she would even be able to face him if she opened her eyes again. And then, after a while, for a while everything was the same, but after that she closed her tearful eye and plunged into a deep sleep. After a while she suddenly heard a familiar voice. It was a maid who came into her room and asked her to wake up, for it was morning. Erica was carrying clean linens and also said that Mr. Alex's distant relatives would be arriving soon. Alicia began to wake up and open her eyes. When she saw the maid in front of her, she was truly surprised. She sat up on the bed. She wondered if she had been calling her all night. The maid laughed and asked if she was not fully awake to say such foolish things. Then Erica got down to business again and said that Mr. Alex's relatives would be here any minute, so she had to change her clothes. But looking head over heels at Mistress, she also apologized, saying that she must be very tired, for the funeral had just ended. Alicia, hearing the name Alex, was very surprised. She thought about it and realized that it wasn't the name of her first husband. Then she suspected that maybe she had succeeded in turning back time after all. Most likely, after that she pulled herself together and did meet the man she was supposed to meet. He sat in the hall and cried and apologized for such a sudden reception without warning. He said he had been out of the country for a long time and thought he would finally be able to visit her, but he never imagined he would find out Alex had died but the day he got home. Alicia smiled and said that she too was very sorry for the loss, but it would have been much better if his coming had been when her husband was alive. The man calmed down a little, and taking the cup in his hands, said that when he drank this tea, he immediately thought of Alex, for he was very fond of lavender tea. Then he wondered if she knew about the burn scar on Alex's shoulder. After all, when they were little, he had insisted on making his own tea. The girl smiled at him and told him that she hadn't realized it was the tea that had caused the scar, and then she inquired what country he had even been in before. The man said that a few days ago he had returned by ship from Dolaburg. She, hearing this, asked if he had really been to that city, for she too had thought of going there just once if she had the chance. In fact, Alicia knew he was a fraud, and no ship connects to this place in Dolaburg, so he was just fooling her all along. In fact, the Republic and Dolaburg have been in a trade dispute since last month, making it impossible for ships to move back and forth. But because the topic was not publicized due to concerns about public opinion, the scammers also used it as a deprivation of something without even realizing it. He's a cattle prod, a man posing as Alex's relative. In reality, he's a con man who's encroaching on her husband's inheritance. Alicia was even now something about falling for this beautiful deception, but she was just in time to figure it out. So the girl smiled and said that he must be tired from the long journey, so she would prepare a room for him to have a good rest. Scott smiled and said that, in fact, he'd be only too happy to do that, and asked if she'd mind him making lunch as well, since he hadn't eaten anything since the road yet. The guest was about to leave, but she stopped him and said that it was still somehow very strange. Alicia said he came to the place as a dear relative of Alex's, but did not even try to look, either at the grave or to hear the cause of the man's death. Scott, when he heard that, immediately became anxious. He was about to make some excuse, but the girl interrupted him again. Then she got up from the couch and smiled and said it was probably because she was tired. She also wished him a good day and rest. Alicia let out a sigh of relief as she walked out the door. But in fact her heart was still racing, but she could breathe easy now. It was something she had already dealt with once in the past. But she still gets very nervous when dealing with scammers again, and it keeps feeling like something very bad is going to happen. At that moment, Erica came up to her and, seeing her worried look, asked if she was okay. Alicia said she was fine, so inquired if she had contacted the public order head. The maid replied that of course she had. For all that, she doesn't understand how the mistress even figured out that it was indeed a rogue. Erica said that he knew about both the scar and Mr. Alex's favorite tea after all, so she thought without a doubt that he was indeed related to him. Mistress was still a little worried. But then she said that it was already obvious when she talked to him, and she thought about the fact that no matter what she said, he had found out about her husband and was very professional in his pretenses. In fact, a little later investigation revealed that Scott had never been overseas or even met Alex live. In the past, her brother had shown up randomly and chased Scott away. However, after that incident, he was going to take care of her property on his own. Therefore, in order to prevent him from getting to Alicia's property this time, she needs to act more cautiously. And thinking over the plan of action, the girl suddenly realized one thing, and couldn't believe that her brother could really have done this. Alicia turned to Erica and said that she needed to go somewhere very urgently, so she asked that the maid prepare everything she needed. Soon after, the girl arrived at the mansion where her brother lived. When he met her, he was very surprised and asked her what made her visit him so suddenly. He also added that if she had contacted him, he would have come to her himself. Alicia smiled and said not at all. She wasn't sure she could summon him to her, as he was very busy with various things. And then, laughing, she asked if this was not a good day for her to come. The man was a little surprised, but said that it was not, because he was always happy to see his sister. At that moment a maid came into the room and, turning to the gentleman, said that Judge Torfsky was coming to see them soon. The guy immediately yelled at her and asked that Juana keep her voice down and speak in a sane manner. But Alicia was very interested, and she asked why Judge Torfsky was needed. The boy in turn told her to sit down, and added that it didn't matter at all. The girl wondered then, and did not understand how it could be unimportant if he was talking about destiny of Torfa, and the latter was, after all, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and it was a mystery to her what he could have to do with her brother. They were soon served tea, and the man asked what had brought her here. Alicia said that just recently a man named Scott visited her, and he introduced himself as a relative of Alex's. When her brother heard this, it appeared that he wasn't surprised at all, but pretended not to understand, and also added that this was the first time he had heard of Alex having any relatives. But he still insisted, and wondered what had happened, for she had come so suddenly. Alicia interrupted him and asked if she could go on, for the cattle were now in the police station. When the boy heard this, he stubbornly choked on his tea in surprise. Some time before, indeed, the police had arrived at her estate and arrested the crook. Scott in turn said that it was all some kind of mistake, and he was really Alex's relative. But she, of course, did not listen to him. When the girl saw that he was choking, she made a worried look and asked if he was all right. Guy, staining his clothes, said he did, and also wondered what he had been taken to the station for in the first place. Alicia smiled and said that apparently he was a con man. It was his goal to get Alex's inheritance. The brother laughed nervously and asked in a trembling voice if he might really be related to him, and she took an innocent man to jail just like that. But the girl replied that such could certainly not be the case, for Alex had not a single relative who warmly accepted and respected him as his own brother. It was he and no one else. The brother got worried and looked away from his sister and said that it was true, but there might have been some misunderstanding. He thought she should listen to the guy again. And Alicia didn't understand what was going on, but assumed it was exactly as she thought it was because of her brother being so worked up about it and trying to even talk her down. In fact, it was her brother who'd been the one who'd said about Alex's scars in advance. In other words, he'd purposefully sent that cattle prod straight to her to deprive her of her financial freedom and appropriate his entire inheritance for himself. Therefore, after learning the truth, the girl smiled and said that there was no need for that, because the head of public order had already investigated and everything had fallen into place. The brother, hearing this, laughed nervously and asked, "Did they even have time to investigate already?" The sister said that since he had committed fraud, it was only natural that he should be punished for it, and for that he should also be investigated. But the brother still protested and asked how such an honest man like him could be a crook. Perhaps there were just some circumstances and reasons for it. The girl was very surprised to hear this, then wondered why he was trying to cover for this man from the beginning. The brother laughed nervously and said that he didn't really mean it. Alicia, still smiling, said that she couldn't forgive the rogue anyway, but planned to deal with the cattle thoroughly. The girl wants this to set a good example for those who want to target someone's inheritance. My brother immediately realized that he needed to act more naturally, so he hid his surprise and said it was the best decision. The girl thanked him and said that she was glad that he had agreed with her. She still couldn't believe that she was finally able to put her brother, who always looked down on her as if she was worthless in this life, in his place. From that moment, some more time had passed. They had finished their tea, and Alicia said that it was time for her to go back, and he, after all, was also very busy. The man, hearing this, was very surprised that she was already leaving, but did not disturb her. Soon Joanna led the lady to the exit. Lastly, the maid told her to be careful. Alicia thanked her and told Joanna to be careful too. Then she wondered why the judge should come to her brother's house. The maid laughed nervously and said that the gentleman had been doing charity work for commoners lately, so she thought that was what it was all about. Alicia, hearing this, was incredibly surprised. She couldn't match even two things, that her brother could have any contact with commoners at all. But Joanna said lastly that it might be hard to believe, but the gentleman had really changed quite a bit. Of course, the girl was not going to believe it, for she realized that such a thing could not be, because a man like him could not change so quickly. Soon she approached the wagon, and the coachman, seeing her with a smile on his face, asked where they were going next. Alicia said she didn't need to go anywhere else for now, so she wanted to go back to the mansion. And at that moment she thought of the fact that her mother and brother would probably keep quiet for a while, but perhaps they would one day try to marry her off again. The man asked that she give him her hand to help her up, at which point the girl looked at the ring. She contemplated a second marriage, then shouted joyfully, saying she had to make the move herself after all. So she changed her route, telling the coachman that they were not going to the mansion, but to Dilway for shopping. The man, hearing this, asked if she really wanted to go shopping in such a long time. At that time, he also said that all the goods at Dilway were of good quality and inquired as to what she was going to purchase. The girl, first getting into the carriage, said that what she would buy for herself would be her new partner for her second marriage. Of course she didn't say those words. In fact, the Dilway Chamber of Commerce is the Republic's leading information center and jack of all trades. Commission is trust and decision is faith. This is the motto that Dilway uses. He accepts all inquiries under this slogan. Soon the girl returned to the mansion, and the butler came to her, saying that a letter had been sent to her. Alicia put her book aside and asked in surprise, "Who is this from?" The man replied that it was from the Chamber of Commerce. When she heard this, she was very glad, for she had waited a long time for this letter. She had visited the Dilway trading post a week ago, and before her mother and brother finished preparing for her second wedding, she had thought of the most legal and safe way to avoid it. Alicia wants to be found a partner for a contract marriage, which is exactly the request she came to this trading house with. The girl took her letter and, thanking the butler, told him he could leave. Chris bowed to her and left the room. As soon as the door closed behind him, the girl immediately opened this letter and began to read it carefully. It said that they were willing to respond to her inquiries and asked that she come to the masquerade at the Verdal Salon, which would take place in 2 days' time. It also said that at the venue she should pay attention to the man in the bull mask and wear the owl mask herself as a reference point. Alicia would need to look for the man who would be wearing the bull's mask, and the girl, when she read all this, jumped straight up from her seat excitedly. In fact, she was doing even better than she had imagined. The girl then turned to Erica, asking if she was around. The maid immediately ran into her room and asked her what had happened. She looked very worried. But Alicia said, in a cheerful voice, that she was going to the masquerade, so she wanted the maid to choose her own dress. Erica, hearing this, was very surprised and asked what this sudden masquerade was all about. But the girl asked that she also prepare an owl-shaped mask for her. This time she was serious about definitely getting her life back under control. At this time, Alicia's mother was hosting a guest at her mansion, And the girl, when she had heard her request in full, asked if she really wanted her to find a new partner. Mother sighed heavily and said that it was exactly as she already knew. Her daughter had lost her husband after a full year of marriage. She told Mrs. Orlando that her heart really hurts when she knows that her little girl is so lonely. And Alex, whom she introduced to her, was such a good person. So this time the woman wants to ask her for help too. But still the girl was very surprised and asked what the rush was for. Mother replied in a serious voice that they understood the grief of those who had lost their husbands, and with tears in her eyes asked if she could please help her, for it was very important. Lady Orlando smiled wickedly and said in a thoughtful voice that she was right after all. The lady herself at this moment thought about the fact that the lady said it was for her daughter's sake. But for some reason, they continued to marry her off for the sake of her husband's property. Orlando continued to smile and said that since her daughter was already married and had a noble lineage, it would be much easier for her to find someone. In fact, the girl has noticed that this woman is very eager to get the money as soon as possible, but she thinks nothing Lady Orlando notices. Mistress laughed nervously and said that she was so inattentive and a little late, even with the gift. At that moment, she took out a box containing a beautiful piece of jewelry. The woman said she had a small gift for Lady Orlando as a token of her appreciation. When she saw it, she was very surprised and said it should not have been done. But Mother smiled and, holding out the box to her, told her to take it without any embarrassment, and then she smiled slyly and said she was just friends. Lady Orlando at that moment said that apparently one of the local aristocrats was looking for a partner. Mrs. Birch, when she heard this, asked who she meant by local and aristocrats. But seeing her frightened face, the lady asked if the locals were not to her liking. The lady said not at all, but simply, as she said, "I am her daughter from a noble lineage." So she thinks that the girl herself understands everything. Orlando was silent for a while, and after that she said that she must have made a point, and in that case there is a young baron, and he only has an impeccable inheritance. When Mrs. Birch heard this, she said, not that she disliked such, but still, could she tell more about him? The lady laughed and said, well, in that case, however, she had just one detail she wanted to be sure to mention. The girl was silent for a while, and afterwards said he had a little trouble with girls. But putting that aside, of course, all the conditions are very good. The fact that he has a lot of women gathering around him. So that's proof of his health and even his attractiveness. However, Mrs. Virtue still asked if such a person would really be interested in her daughter, for as the lady herself knows, her daughter is not that attractive. But Orlando told her not to worry because her daughter would be just right for this man. He likes a little silent girls. And Alicia is and will be the perfect match, as a wise woman who provides peace of mind for the whole family. Lady Orlando inquired, and how was he to her, for the man is popular with the girls, and none would refuse the opportunity of becoming his lawful wedded wife. Mistress thought for a while, and said that in that case, she would give her an answer the next day to think things over carefully. Mrs. Birch then went outside and thought that this girl was acting too grand for the role of a mediator. It was hard for the woman to believe that this was really and truly the attitude of the royal family, but she really hoped that the second marriage would be successful, because then she would never have to see her face again. However, still, if that person has a good inheritance, it is very much fine for them. Still, Lady Birch wondered how he was popular if he was a local, and he had girl trouble. She realized that she should consult her son as soon as possible. After all, she could rely on him at times like this. 2 whole days had passed since then, and there was a masquerade ball in the salon of Verdil, just as the letter had said. Alicia was looking around when she got there, and realized that she had only heard rumors about it before, but the place was actually even much more posh than she had imagined. Alicia wore an owl mask, as she was supposed to make her easily recognizable, and was also wearing an elegant purple dress. At this point herself, she began to look at various people wearing interesting masks in search of that very same bull mask. But soon a man approached her from behind and asked why such a beautiful girl was all alone that night. He put his hand on her shoulder and told her that if she wasn't expecting anyone, maybe they could even settle in together and have a good time. Alicia tried to brush him off and said she was against it, so she asked that he get off her back already. However, the man turned out to be very pushy, He said that she should not be so afraid because he only wanted to get to know her better. He took a closer look at her and said it was probably her first time in a place like this. He also added that it was kind of cute in its own way. The girl couldn't stand it all, and raised her voice and asked him to stop doing all this, and added that she would call security if he didn't stop. At that moment, a man came to her rescue, just as she was wearing a black bull mask. He apologized for the distraction, but told the guy to find another partner. The guy put his arm around Alicia's waist and said that she was with him that night, so the guy had better back off if he didn't want trouble. The man then turned to the girl and said he was glad they were finally able to meet. At that moment he began to remove his mask, and underneath it revealed a very even appearance. A dark-haired guy who called her his goddess of victory. Alicia was very surprised to see him, and was about to ask something, but he interrupted her. The man put a finger to his lips, indicating for her to be quiet, and suggested that she go somewhere quieter for starters. Soon they both went out on the terrace to be alone and talk. Alicia was very surprised at this choice, but the man explained that it was because it was very noisy everywhere, and they wouldn't be able to have a proper conversation. After that, he bowed and said with a smile that it was a little late for introductions, but it would still be impolite of him. The guy said that his name was Tiberius Maximus, and that he was the president of the corporation. When she heard that, she was very surprised, because she didn't expect to hear such a thing. But the man kept talking and said that even if she did not approach them, she could still find a good partner for remarriage. Alicia realized that they would be talking business, so she relaxed a little, smiled, and said that she didn't have someone she liked yet. But it still surprised her that the president had come all this way to find her a partner in an effective marriage. When the girl said she wanted someone who suited her firm preference, a commoner who was in no way connected to the aristocracy, so that by law she would have every right to divorce him during the contract. Alicia looked very serious and told the man that she would make the most important conditions, which must be. Then the girl said that he must survive, lest he should happen to be involved in an incident or fall ill from some disease, but still stay alive. Summarizing, she said that these were the most important conditions for her husband that she wished to see respected. In fact, in the past, Parts and her mother have killed 4 of her husbands like nothing happened. The partner she finds shouldn't just die at their hands. That's why she's activated all these conditions. Shortly thereafter, the man smiled and said he understood her and would do anything to make sure she was satisfied with the service. He bowed and winked at her and told her that as her husband, he promised that he would stay alive no matter what happened. Alicia, hearing this, was very surprised. She couldn't believe that he was seriously saying that now. She was silent for a while, and then she began to scream. The girl asked if he would independently fulfill the role of her contracted husband. The man was completely calm and said that he was a commoner and had no ties to the nobility associated with the Republic. It was not his purpose to steal her inheritance or any property. He also said he is very good with a gun and guns in general. He is careful with his words, quite attentive, and he certainly does not have any illnesses. Maxim said that he could go on listing his virtues and qualities for a long time, but he decided that it wasn't worth doing any more. The girl agreed and said that she had heard enough. She was very worried and thought about the fact that he really was perfect for all her requirements, and judging by his actions, he wasn't even the sloppy type. The man had a well-toned body and occupies the ideal profession of Chamber of Commerce president. Besides, Maxim has a rather magnificent appearance that will make one stare at him, but she had no way of understanding why he was so eager to enter into this contract with her. She was silent for a while after that and wondered what his demands would be. The man smiled, as if he was glad she had finally asked, and said that he wanted to spend married life as if it were really real. Maxim wants to eat together, sleep on the same bed, explain to each other some unclear points, do everything possible to fulfill their duties as husband and wife. At this point, he came closer to her and even touched her face. But the girl quickly removed his hands and asked if he had deliberately made such conditions, and also asked what was the reason for all this. Maxim, still smiling, said it was all because he wanted to try just that, and that's all. There were no tricks or secret plans involved. Alicia said that his curiosity, so to speak, could be satisfied in other ways, after all. So why did he choose this one? The man replied that he was actually a more open-minded person than many people believe, and wondered if she was so uncomfortable with his terms, or if she just didn't believe him. The girl just stood silently looking at him for a while. And afterward she said that it was perfectly natural to know the reason when an arranged marriage was proposed. When you've been married once before, once, and she thinks there's nothing wrong with it. The man smiled and said that she was an aristocrat, and a very beautiful one at that. The girl continued to insist, and said that he was free to choose other beautiful aristocrats in the same way. Then his voice suddenly became quieter, and he said that he was born in a lower society, and didn't even have an education, so the aristocrats always looked down on him. He looked her straight in the eyes and told her that he really wanted her to teach him a lot. It would be a very useful lesson for him. Alicia still wished to know every last detail, so she said that there were plenty of etiquette teachers in their time and even cheap ones could be found. Maxim smiled and said that he could thus learn from her not only etiquette from a husband's address to his wife to the family life of aristocrats, but all of it was part of life with her. Then he lowered his voice and said that he was actually just a little embarrassed because marriage and love were all firsts for him. The girl, upon hearing this, became even more indignant. She couldn't believe that he didn't even have experience in love, but then she thought about it and realized that there was no commoner who would be a better person as revenge for her family. Alicia knew he would be perfect for the role, for she had a family that was firmly intent on electing people for her. But for all that, this contract would still only be good for her, so she hesitated. After a while she said that so far she was very clear. However, their terms did not find a balance. The girl realized that they should definitely deal with this from the beginning, in order not to put it off, so she inquired about the fame. Maxime, hearing this, asked in surprise what she meant. Then the girl said that that was exactly what she was going to teach him. Alicia knew it was the only way for a commoner to overcome his limitations and gain enough power and honor to influence the Republic. And with a pleased expression on her face, she wondered if maybe he should become consul. In fact, the supreme leader of the Republic, who could not speak without hesitation even in an assembly of noble elders since the birth of the Republic, had always held that place among the nobility. Alicia said that as payment for this marriage, she would help him to fight back against all those who despised and humiliated him. She smiled the whole time and said that just the thought of it made her heart burn. In fact, if she makes a commoner consul, it means that she will ruin absolutely all of her brother's dreams, and nothing else could be more perfect than this revenge. Maxime stood silent for a while, pondering her proposal. Then he smiled and said that if she taught him, he would do his best to live up to her expectations. He bowed and told the girl that she could rely on him, for he would not let her down. Shortly afterward, the girl returned to her castle and immediately fell asleep. The next morning, she began to study various books. Alicia had to think ahead and figure out in advance where to start his training so as not to waste any time. Opening one of the books, she studied the information and realized that this was going to be a really long and difficult journey. But soon a butler entered and informed her that Sir Juriel and Mrs. Birch had arrived. Alicia put the book aside, realizing that before these guests, she needed to deal with them first. Immediately going down to her mother and brother, she was greeted by her mother with a smile, who inquired how she was feeling, noting that she seemed to have become very busy lately. After greeting them, Alicia apologized for her sudden appearance. Mother smiled and motioned for them to move to the living room for more comfortable conversation, saying they had a conversation to have. Alicia said cheerfully that she had something she wanted to tell them both. Without hesitation, she announced that she had decided to marry a commoner. The surprise on her brother's and mother's faces. They had not expected this. Her mother came up to her and grabbed her by the shoulders and asked her if it was true and if she was really going to marry a commoner. Her brother also began to reassure her, telling her to think about it. Mom agreed, saying it was too soon after losing Alex. Alicia calmly replied that she wasn't saying as if the wedding was going to happen right away, but just wanted to say that she already had someone she wanted to marry. His brother breathed out a sigh of relief, but said, still, that even if that was true, it wasn't good enough for a commoner. His mother looked away and said that Alex had died, and she must be lonely now, so she'd decided to find comfort in him. They were silent for some time, after which mother and son looked each other over, and Pars, stretching out each word, inquired as to the situation, that is money, of this commoner. In fact, when it comes to this question, Alicia always only wants to laugh. She can't even now believe that when she tells them that she found a new man after her husband died, the first thing they don't ask is about his financial status. Her mother, seeing her wary face, said that perhaps she didn't understand because she was still very young, but that money was really important in life. She said, smiling, that they too had suffered a great deal when the Revolutionary Army had taken away all their possessions. Alicia continued to remain calm and said that of course she remembered that, but she still had Alex's legacy from his death, and it was important to her now that the new person was healthy. Pars suddenly couldn't stand it all. He started yelling, said she had earlier almost fallen for the crook's forehead. So this man is probably targeting her property too. Alicia smiled and said that she was not at all, and that he was completely wrong about that. But the man insisted, and asked her why she was so sure of this man. The girl at this moment thought about the fact that even if it was about money, he probably wouldn't beat the two of them. In fact, right after she'd made a pact with Maxime, checking on her mother and brother's financial situation, as she'd expected, they were living large, beyond her expectations. Oh, and to top it all off, while the girl was in tears seeing Alex off to the netherworld, they were at that moment taking on debts on his behalf. Alicia got very serious and said that she was a full-grown adult, and so whether she got married or divorced, she would decide for herself. She smiled triumphantly and said that she certainly didn't need their permission in such things. Mother and brother became nervous. Then the lady said that still she, as her mother, was worried about what kind of man this fiancé of hers was. Alicia, turning to leave, said that she would be sure to introduce them soon, so they wouldn't have to worry. At that moment, the butler suddenly came up to her and said it was time to pack. She turned to her family and, after apologizing, said she had to meet someone. She would have a carriage ready for them and wished them a safe journey home. Mother was very surprised and asked how could it be so. She wondered if she could postpone the meeting and spend time with her. After all, they should have tea and go and choose a dress for her. In fact, before, Alicia used to do that, because she thought that making her mother happy was the only thing to do. But she's not her pretty doll anymore, so she won't be her errand boy. So putting a sweater over her shoulders, she said that the appointment had already been made, so she suggested to Mother that they do it all themselves next time. Then she waved them goodbye and wished the wallflowers a good journey. She herself at that moment thought of what would surely make them kneel before her and hoped that they would realize what a sin they were committing. When the girl left her mother and brother alone, the woman could not stand it, and crying asked, "What shall they do now?" Pars was shocked himself. He said that it felt like the girl had changed a lot lately, and it was probably because of that commoner. Mistress agreed and said that it was right, for she had been such a lad before. There was no doubt that she was being influenced by this doubtful fiancé. The man said that besides, she was the last princess, and there was no way they would let some dirty commoner take away the dignity of royalty. He became very serious and told Mother that she could rely on him, for whatever method he used would still solve the problem. At the same time, Alicia arrived at her husband's meeting. She came and apologized for being late because she had been delayed. The man who sat at a small table with a cup of coffee said not at all, for he himself had just arrived. Looking around, the girl asked, "Is this really the new cafe that opened in the Dileys?" The man replied that this was all true and asked, did she really like it that much? Alicia, taking a seat at the table, said that yes, Vitya, she had heard that this place was very famous for its chocolate drink, and she had always wanted to try it. Max looked at her and asked how about her ordering it and trying it out. Seeing her surprised face, he said that sure, it couldn't normally be served without a reservation, but she could order it any time she wanted. He smiled and said it was such a privilege she had as a bride. Alicia was pleased and thought about how, when you think about it that way, he was even too good for a partner who was only under contract. She then decided to strike up a conversation, and seeing the cup on the table asked, "Does he really drink coffee?" Max replied that that was right. He didn't like black tea very much, and also said that he knew a very interesting fact. Namely that in one country, There was even a revolution because of coffee. When the girl heard this, she replied that he was quite well read and seemed to have a lot of knowledge, so it would be easier to train him after all. Maxim put the mug on the table and said that even though it would still have to be done, and asked, "Does she really think this is going to be an easy thing to do?" Without letting her answer, he told the girl that very soon they would be married. But before that, they would have to fall in love with each other first. When she heard this, she was very surprised and realized that in that case it meant that she had come on a date. Max confirmed this information and said that a date for lovers is a big deal and he will remember anything, so she might as well start studying already. Alicia realized that now she had a problem. She had said she would train him, but she was almost new to marriage and love. She had been married 4 times up to that point, and all of those husbands had been presented to her by her mother and brother, and she had never even spent the night with them once. Because of health problems or because there was no charm in her, all these husbands got themselves mistresses with whom they had fun. They had various reasons for rejecting the girl, and now when she started to remember all this, she even became sad. The man, seeing the look on her face, asked, "Is something wrong?" But she immediately replied that everything was fine. Alicia began to worry, for she did not know how she could teach him about love and family life when she knew nothing about it. Maxim, seeing her worries, reached for her hair and said she had something on her head. The girl, seeing a large hand reaching for her face, immediately dodged and closed her eyes. It was all because she remembered how her husband, when they were together, started yelling at her and said it was for the way she treated him. In this way, he was saying that he was hammering into her all the manners a girl should have. That's why Alicia started to cover her face with her hands. But when she saw that nothing was happening, she realized it was for nothing. Maxim, who had just wanted to remove some dirt from her hair, froze in surprise. He didn't understand why she was reacting the way she was. The girl at this moment was herself surprised to be so suddenly reminded of her third husband, Donison. Then the man apologized for scaring her, but said she just had something in her hair. That's why he wanted to remove it. Alicia, who sat up straight at this point, said with a trembling voice that such a thing should just be warned with words, not reached for with her hands. The man looked at his hand, and then, clenching it into a fist, said that he didn't want to ask her that at first, but he thought it was worth it. Maxim didn't know how to express it, and thought that he had insulted or offended her in some way, since she had such a reaction. But at that moment, their conversation was interrupted by someone's voice. It was her brother, who came into the cafe and asked Alicia if this was the man she was talking about. The girl immediately turned in his direction and couldn't believe he had actually come. Pars moved closer to her and asked the man who he even was, and added that he should only try to touch his sister. The girl looked at her brother in surprise at this moment, and couldn't believe that he had actually gone straight after her to track her down. The guy was silent for a while, examining her fiancé, and said that he looked very boring. Then he turned to his sister and asked her what she was thinking of taking in a man like that. Alicia at this point got up from her seat and asked that he stop already, and wondered if he didn't realize that this was someone dear to her. Pars only laughed and asked how this commoner could be precious to her. He still can't believe that she picked up a man who hides behind her skirt, and she is very good herself. He doesn't understand what kind of cheap manners she has. Maxim had just been sitting silently all this time, but he looked very serious. And putting his hand on the table, he said that he didn't deny that he was a boring commoner. At that moment he stood up from the table, and putting his hand on the girl's shoulder, said that whoever he was, even family needed to choose their words well, because what he had said earlier was over the top. Pars, hearing these words, became even more angry. He began to shout, asking what he was saying, and wondered if he had deigned to open his mouth and say something in his defense. The guy kept yelling and asked him to tell him what he was going to do with his sister's property. Then Alicia couldn't take it anymore. She wanted to say something to him, but the guy asked her not to interfere in the conversation, because he was also the one who wanted to deprive her of all her money. But at that moment Max stepped forward and held out his business card, and said that he had forgotten to introduce himself. The guy said that he ran the Delua Chamber of Commerce, and his name was Tiberius Maximus.